Chapter 14. Battle Soul. Ronin heaved for breath as the eerie silence filled the compound. The men watching the arena from along the gangways simply stared at him, stupefied. For the 100,000 watching men to keep quiet for even a second was a miracle. But what had happened here was simply too absurd. Ronin looked up at the railing along the upper section of the compound, where most of the guards stood. At least they weren't pointing their guns at him. "Remind me never to mess with that guy," a voice from the surrounding crowd said, finally breaking the silence. "Yeah, did you see what he did to that short fellow? He used him as a weapon." Someone besides him spoke. As was inevitable when over 100,000 people were packed together in a room, the air once again began buzzing. Gruff grunts and harsh laughs intermixed with the noise one would expect from a prison, and Ronin let out a breath in relief. He didn't mind attention, but considering the alien artifact and the situation he was in, this was a matter of life and death. He stumbled out of the arena, then inspected his injuries. Besides the older laser burn to his left thigh, his legs seemed fine. His upper body, however, had suffered quite the punishment. There were bruises everywhere and he'd been cut in several places. Most of his wounds were shallow, that is, except one rather deep cut to his abdomen. To stop the bleeding, he tore off a part of his white prison shirt, then tied it around his waist. Inmates that fought in the arena didn't get special treatment. Presumably, the guards expected the nanites to do the healing, and if that wasn't enough, the inmates would just have to toughen it out themselves. While sagging his feet, Ronin began the climb back up to his cell. Everywhere he walked now, a wide path opened up before him. The moment he got close, the prisoners just moved out of the way, averting their gaze so as to not make eye contact. Step after step, he slogged his way up the stairs, passing hundreds of inmates. "Monster," someone whispered. "Not human," he heard someone else say. The words were spoken in low voices and were likely not meant for his ears. It's better this way, Ronin thought. If the choice was between being called a monster and being seen as a juicy bounty, he'd be the monster every time. As he reached his cell, Ronin was immediately met by his, now, 4 frightened cellmates. "Listen," he began. "Marvin and that other guy tried to kill me. I meant what I said earlier. If you mean no harm, there is no danger. I'm the same man I was yesterday." It did seem to ease them, a little. "But how did you get so strong?" the partly bionic cellmate asked, nervously rubbing his metal leg. "I don't know what to tell you," Ronin said, walking over to his bunk. "Are you thinking of bionic enhancements? Let's just say I'm all natural for now." "Wait, don't tell me you've actually found someone willing to perform genetic editing?" The half-machine followed up, not even bothering to cloak his interest. "Look, for all intents and purposes, I'm clean," Ronin replied curtly. "And please don't mention this again. You all know how the government treats people that have altered themselves genetically." It seemed his cellmates believed his abnormal strength came from artificial enhancements. And, well, they weren't entirely wrong. The alien artifact most definitely wasn't natural. But what could he say? "Hey guys, I've been doing some alien doping. I know aliens are one of the most dangerous things in the universe, but hear me out. Number. Better to let them believe it was something else. Anyways, let's talk more tomorrow, all right? I've just fought over 50 people," Ronin finished, then slumped down on the bunk. A little dizzy from blood loss, he looked at the white blankets under him. They were now turning red from the blood he'd been bathed in. Most of that blood wasn't even his. He next looked at the iron bars separating the top and bottom bunk, then at his cellmates beyond. I killed over 30 people today, he thought. He should have felt bad about that. In fact, there were a lot of things he should feel, a lot of things he should care about. But he didn't. Not anymore. How long before I kill my remaining cellmates? And if I ever get out, how long before I do something unforgivable to my friends and family? Ronin knew he was changing, and he was changing in ways that went beyond both the alien subconscious influence and his new hunger for battle. This day only made that clearer. No, to remain himself, and without a virtual reality game to help him, his only option now was the Potentia panorama. An alien solution to an alien problem, he mused. He'd tried this before, but the Calvracian embrace was a technique which focused on the body, not the mind. Those new gates he'd found, though, now they were something different. Ronin then closed his eyes and entered his mind palace. He began to walk along the familiar cracked corridors of the mental spaceship, pondering. He would really need to fix this place soon. Repairing 10% of the damage here had already cleared up a lot of the brain fog he was experiencing. Currently, his mind was about where it had been before absorbing the alien artifact. But how clear would his mind be if he fully fixed this place? He turned another corner, arriving before the gate he'd chosen. Out of the two gates relating to the mind, he'd picked the larger one. Although the smaller of the two gates was probably easier to open, Ronin needed concrete results. If he could raise his mental resilience with this larger gate, it might be just the variable he needed. He placed his hands on the gate. Every second I delay is another second I change. It's time to fight back. He readied himself, flexing his mental muscles as he focused on the tall fractal structure before him. Here goes nothing, he thought, then pushed. Ronin felt the massive structure yield as slowly the gate began to open. At the same time, though, something else began expanding as well. As Ronin pushed, the cracks along his mental palace began widening. Too busy focusing on the gate, he paid it no mind. He dug deep, using all the strength he had, and as the gate passed a certain threshold, he felt it give. Poof! The gate blasted wide open, and with it came not memories this time, but experience. Sitting on a meditation mat, Ronin, now with 4 arms and blue skin, gazed at the instructor with fervor. The endless path is a lonely journey, the instructor said. Not a single warrior of eternity has not had a mind of steel. Souls break under the weight of truth, and the heavens seek for all things to return to origin. How do you defy it? He next saw a golden light spread out from the instructor, touching every member watching the sermon. As the light reached him, Ronin felt it. Rage. Endless rage. But there was something else there as well. Something smoldering under the surface. Smaller, yet more powerful. A spirit of indomitability filled him. It was ferocious. It was unyielding. It demanded struggle. It demanded conflict. Ronin, along with every other alien in the room, stood up, then roared. The vision of the instructor then faded, as it was replaced by a series of battles. Ronin fought insect-like creatures, characterized by thick armor-like carapace. He fought gigantic reptiles. He fought blue-skinned aliens like himself. Battle after battle, it kept going. From a few dozen fights, it soon became 100. That 100 then turned into 1,000. With every new opponent that appeared, the battle was different, and the opponents grew stronger. He acquired injuries along the way, only for them to be healed with the next opponent he fought. Throughout it all, one thing remained constant: the indomitable spirit. The technique he'd learned on that meditation mat followed every technique he did, every battle fought, and every emotion felt. Be it in the despair of defeat or in the euphoria of victory, the technique used it all, feeding on it as it became stronger, more real. Throughout the endless battles, right at the end, the spirit transformed, turning into tangible figures which stood guard at the alien's mind. Battle soul, a warrior soul made to withstand eternity. This path combines struggle, instinct, and will, as well as the warrior's knowledge in battle into mental guardians, protecting the warrior's mind against both external and internal threats. Back in reality, Ronin stood in his mental palace, enraptured by the technique. He'd experienced years of fighting in those memories. What an incredibly versatile art. He beamed, looking at the vague figures now covering the edge of his mindscape. The more fights he had, the more difficulties he went through, the stronger the battle soul would be. He finally had a way to resist the alien artifact. That's when he felt it. The backlash. His mind palace rumbled as the numerous cracks running through it reached a breaking point. Whatever Ronin had repaired earlier crumbled, and the mind palace began falling apart. He groaned in pain. He needed to do something. Fumbling for a way to use his new technique, as if by instinct, he mobilized the figures at the edge of his mindscape. From standing guard outside, they rushed into the large mental spaceship, then did their best to hold it together. Ronin tried using the indomitable will he'd felt the alien use to strengthen the figures, but the mental guardians didn't change. The iron-blooded will he'd been shown by the alien was something that had to be trained. Simply watching someone else go through the process only gave him knowledge, not strength. Still, it wasn't as if Ronin had no will of his own. As his mind palace crumbled, he used his desire to build ships, to see the stars, and to live free as he infused the mental guardians, strengthening them. It was a far cry from what the alien had done, but in contrast to the alien, Ronin had already taken a shortcut, gaining a battle soul far sooner than he should. The expanding cracks slowed, encountering more resistance as he used the pain he felt to further fuel his will. Eventually, the ongoing collapse slowed down to a crawl before stopping completely. Ronin made a mental sigh. Well, I'm never doing that again. Exiting his mind palace, he opened his eyes. It was dark in his cell. Too dark. He tried squinting his eyes. Nothing. Have I gone blind? Chapter 15. A Month and a Promise. Ronin felt a creeping sensation of horror travel up his back. He couldn't see. Everything was simply black, and his head felt like it had been split open. Would his vision even return? Or was it gone for good now? I need to fix this. If he couldn't see, he couldn't work. And with work being the only way to get food, he'd starve. He once again entered his mind palace, seeing destruction everywhere. With the number of large rifts and tears that tore through his mental spaceship, he wasn't quite sure where to start. Much of the outer walls had crumbled and large sections of the ship were simply gone. The only parts of his mind palace that fully held together were the gates from the Potentia panorama. Since everything is damaged, I guess fixing this place is as good as any, Ronin reasoned, then walked up to the first crack nearby. Fortunately, the situation wasn't entirely hopeless. With his new battle soul technique to prevent further damage, he was at least free to begin repairing the rifts. Ronin conjured himself a mental representation of a heavy piece of metal, then placed it in the crack. Next, he conjured up a mental blowtorch, then began welding the crack shut. Hurt as he was, the piece of metal felt heavy, and the blowtorch caused his already sore mind to radiate pain. Plate by plate, section after section, he slowly made repairs. The strain of the work made the headache worse, but after sealing his 10th crack, Ronin noticed that the deeper form of pain he felt lessened a little. He was straining his mind to the limit, but the worst of the injuries were improving. Ronin walked over towards the 11th crack, or more accurately, the rift, then sighed internally. This thing was so large it tore through half his mind palace. It would take hours to fix. This is going to be a long night. He conjured another piece of metal, then placed it inside the rift. As morning eventually arrived, and the artificial light of the prison complex turned on, Ronin slowly opened his eyes. His head still hurt, but it wasn't as bad as before. Right now, however, there was a greater concern. Squinting his eyes, he could faintly make out vague outlines of shapes. He could see his bunk and the gangway outside, but it was all fuzzy somehow. Anything small was for all intents and purposes invisible. At least my blindness isn't permanent, Ronin thought in relief. He'd underestimated the threat from the gates, and this was a rude wake-up call. Next time I do something like that, my mind has to be ready. In this case, the cost had been worth it, regardless of what happened. But he still could have spent more time fixing his mind palace earlier. Ronin made a solemn vow. From now on, he would never open a gate before his mind was fully healed. As he fumbled his way out of the bloody bunk, like clockwork, the morning alarm began to boom across the complex. Stumbling out of the cell, Ronin was then lifted off the gangway and down to the first floor. He didn't see much of anything, but he saw where the inmates were moving. Following along, he began one of the most unproductive work shifts of his life. Turns out, being half-blind wasn't exactly conducive to mining in dark tunnels. Sure, he could get through the life gate easily. The surrounding inmates ran like addicts fleeing a loan shark as he approached. But he had to be able to see where he was going. Just finding the jackhammer alone took him over half an hour. By the time his 10-hour time limit had passed, Ronin had only filled 4 of his required 10 carts. There would be no food today. Every prisoner ate their bar of synth paste the moment they got it, so he wouldn't be able to steal one either. Even worse, the nanobots had begun cannibalizing his body in an attempt to heal his injuries. If he couldn't eat, it wouldn't be long before the bots killed him. Ronin fumbled his way back up to his cell, practiced the Calvrakian embrace, then sat down and entered his mind palace again. I already feel like I'm starving, he grumbled. How long did he have? A few days? By how he felt now, he probably wouldn't even last out the week. With each day on Exodon being counted as on Concordia, he had 50 hours each day. Considering that he needed to sleep, and the daily 10 hours spent mining, this left him with a total of 30 hours a day to repair his head. The entire prison is scared of me, but I can't even eat, he thought as he conjured up a piece of metal. Ronin shook his head. Let's say I can hold on for 4 days. That leaves me with at most 120 hours to repair my mind enough to see properly. It should be doable. He kept repairing his mind until he fell asleep, and by the time he woke up the next day, he could make out the shapes of the inmates around him. He filled up 5 carts this time. On the 3rd day, he could faintly make out the shapes of faces. This time, he filled 8 carts. On the 4th day since going half-blind, he could finally see enough to begin working properly again. but Ronin's own body had begun working against him. It felt like there was a black hole inside his stomach. It devoured him from within. Simply moving had become tiresome. Still, he'd done it. In 9 hours and 43 minutes, he'd filled 10 carts with fractured rock. Finally, he could eat. In spite of getting his steady supply of food back, in the days that followed, Ronin didn't stop. He spent nearly every waking moment fixing his mind palace, only pausing when working the mine or when he practiced the Calvrachian embrace. By the end of the week, he'd stabilized his mind enough to begin freeing up the mental guardians of his battle soul technique. Ronin hummed. He was currently standing in front of one of these mental guardians, inspecting it. With its 4 arms, the creature looked to be in the middle of tearing off a carapace of some kind. Wasn't this one of the combat techniques he'd seen the alien use during his vision earlier? Ronin reached out, then touched the guardian. It felt alien, which was not really surprising, but it also felt like it was a part of him somehow. He stepped back, then tried to connect to the figure. He'd already established a link like this before, but at that time it had been instinctual. Ronin focused on his own will, searching for the feeling he'd felt when he stopped the mind palace from crumbling. He saw a golden line appear between him and the guardian. "No, I'm still missing something," Ronin mumbled. He walked up to the figure, then touched it again, now with the mental link fully active. "To me," he said, willing it to happen. The figure dissolved, then overlapped with Ronin's as he felt his mind become stronger. "Yeah, that's more like it." He clenched his hands in triumph. He could speed up his healing now. Congratulating himself on a job well done, Ronin was about to exit his mindscape but stopped himself. Everywhere he looked, he now noticed a faint golden light, a light that wasn't his. Could this be the alien artifact energy? He wondered. Is this what's changing my personality? If the mental guardians could help him locate the alien influence, they might also be able to help him stop it. The days became routine after that, and 1 week turned into several. Ronin still focused on improving his mind, but now that the more pressing concerns were gone, he also spent more time on other things. Besides doing the Calvrachian embrace every 8 hours, he spent time socializing with his cellmates and studied the texts he'd memorized from the academy. By his 2nd week on Exodon, Ronin had reached the 6th stance in the Calvrachian embrace, and by the 3rd week, he'd reached the 7th. That was also when he reached a bottleneck. He spent an entire 2 weeks just reaching the 8th stance, and even after a full day of practice, he'd only progressed by about 2% into it. At this rate, it will take me 50 days to complete this stance. Just what am I missing? Ronin wondered. Before he could think more on the issue, though, he was interrupted by the large, burly man sitting next to him. "Again!" Bulkster shouted. Ronin rolled up his sleeves, then placed his now emaciated arms back on the makeshift table. It was time for another round of arm wrestling. The comparatively much larger hand of Bulkster engulfed Ronin's, and the contest began. After warming up to him, his cellmates had begun this daily ritual a couple of weeks back. Or more accurately, Bulkster did the arm wrestling, whereas the others watched. The larger man's big arms and better technique had won out easily in the beginning, but Ronin was a quick learner. "Are you sure you want to do this? You know what will happen, right?" Ronin said, pulling the 2 interlocked hands closer to his side of the table. "Arrogant!" the giant grunted, then leaned in to compensate for the loss in leverage. It would not be enough. With how strong Ronin had become now, he had truly transitioned into the realm of the superhuman. The alien energy permeated every cell he had, making them stronger, and now that he'd mastered the arm wrestling technique, he'd never lose to Bulkster again. Clamping down on the table with his elbow and knee, Ronin slowly lowered the bigger hand down. Thud! No! Bulkster roared, then scowled at Ronin. Again! It's no use, Henrik. He was always stronger. It was only a matter of time before he'd learn enough to beat you, said Derek Einstar, the half-machine, half-man. Hey, unlike you, I'm not the kind of man who gives up. Bulkster, or more accurately Henrik, bit back. It's called being smart. I didn't fight the planetary guard when they came to collect my taxes. We've already talked about this, Bulkster complained. I'd already paid my taxes, but they wanted more. Of course I had to stand up for myself. Yeah. Out of every possible crime the 2-meter-tall giant could have been in for, tax evasion was the last thing Ronin would have thought of. By the way, anyone interested in coming along to watch the meteor shower tomorrow? Olsen Scar, the man with the CLM tattoo, asked. Meteor shower? Ronin wondered. No, more importantly, we're in a prison inside a literal mountain right now. How? Probably noticing Ronin's confusion, the CLM man chuckled. There are pathways out of the mountain. We'll have to work for a few hours extra, but if your body can handle the burn, it's well worth the show. Nah, I'm not into that kind of stuff. Bulkster brushed him off. Derek simply pointed towards his metallic parts. No can do. Olsen then looked to Ronin. What about you? It only happens once a year. Are you kidding me? Of course I'm coming, Ronin replied. A meteor shower? On a different planet? There was no need to ask. He was in the moment he heard the word meteor. After discussing the plan tomorrow with the terrorist, Ronin hit the bunk, then began the usual bedtime routine. He closed his eyes, then entered the mental realm. There were dozens of mental guardians scattering the edge of his mindscape now. He gazed at them, then muttered, "To me." The guardians rushed over, then dissolved as they merged with him, filling him with power. With access to new senses, Ronin could see the foreign golden energy everywhere now. There was just so much, but he could still hold it back. He looked at the barrier he'd erected 2 weeks ago. Straining under the pressure, the barrier held back the flood of golden light, protecting him. He'd learned how to do this sometime after merging with the Guardians, and it had worked like a charm. He didn't unknowingly walk into places of danger anymore. He didn't feel that all-consuming hunger for battle. It felt good to be himself again, though. Some changes had clearly been permanent. Ronin still felt no guilt over the people he'd killed. In addition, for every day he didn't fight someone, the more the energy kept coming. As a result, holding back the energy had become an ever-increasing, ongoing struggle. Just then, the barrier flickered, and some of the golden light made its way in. He flexed his new mental muscles, then grit his teeth. It was time to go to war again. The next morning, Ronin and Olsen, the BLM terrorist, headed through the life gate and into the cave system. With his stronger body, Ronin had become a fast miner, and after spending a couple of hours filling up his 10 mandatory carts, he placed the jackhammer to the side, then went over to Olsen. Crack! His cellmate launched another burst of pressure into the basalt, fracturing it. Ronin bent down, then picked up some of the rock fragments. So, What made you decide to become a terrorist? He asked. Terrorist? Olson questioned. No, the CLM stands for liberation. You know, this prison isn't really that different from Concordia. We're all trapped here. Well, it wasn't liberators that fired rockets at me 2 months back. That was you guys, replied Ronin. Olson moved the jackhammer over to another location. Haven't you ever wondered why it's so hard to leave Tar? He asked, brushing past Ronin's statement. We have the technology to leave, but if you disregard what you've heard in the media, who do you actually know that's left this place? Ronin furrowed his brows. One of his earlier friends had indeed tried to leave. The guy had earned enough credits, then tried to book a trip out of the system. Ronin didn't know much of it, but he'd gotten rejected somehow. Still, why would Olson choose such a strange topic when introducing terrorism? What do you mean? Asked Ronin. My point is, Olson twisted the jackhammer's handle, fracturing more bedrock. If you can't even leave, what freedom do you really have? And why would the government even prevent people from leaving in the first place? I don't know, replied Ronin. Makes you wonder, huh? How much of what you know is actually really true? How much of it is a lie? And why are so many people living in such poverty? If the government is not evil, why are you here right now and not on Concordia? You're innocent, right? All right, I get it. Ronin cut him off. You bomb innocents because you think the government hurts more people than it has to. No, said Olson. I didn't join the CLM because the government hurts people. I joined because they killed my son when he tried to leave. Oh, Ronin replied. The conversation turned quiet after that, and they worked in silence until Olson's 10 carts were filled. They then began moving along a series of different tunnels, and Ronin saw more people join them. Entering something akin to a central tunnel, the stream of inmates around them soon grew to thousands of people. Has anyone ever tried to escape like this? Ronin asked, finally breaking the silence. In the beginning, we all had to go on this pilgrimage. The prison enforced it. Maybe they thought it would help rehabilitate us or something, the CLM man said, pointing towards one of the aged posters along the tunnel wall. The poster depicted a spaceship, transporting a huge chunk of ice towards a blackish-red planet. It read, "A new life has more meaning when you see what you build. We are all valued cogs in the machine called civilization." So the meteors are made of ice, but what of my earlier question? Ronin said, a little peeved at being deflected and ignored every time he asked this guy something. Yeah, it's all a part of the terraforming project, Olson replied. They put boosters onto comets out in the Urdog belt, then send them here. Anyways, you should forget about escaping. Many have tried, but this prison is not without its defense systems. I saw some escapees attempt to fly out once. They had some friends come in on a ship. The CLM man chuckled dryly. The ship was shot down the moment it came near. They didn't stand a chance. There was a break in the conversation as the tunnel rose up into a short, steep incline. After they climbed up, Olson, in between breaths, continued. The planet's moons have military installations. They're kitted out with everything from railguns and rockets to high-powered lasers. The complex has some stuff too. If you ask me, you'd need an army if you wish to break out. Ronin considered Olson's words. Impossible to escape unless I have an army? Fine. I guess the strong do as they will and the weak suffer what they must. If I'm to have any chance at my dream, then, in other words, I must become strong, unreasonably and undeniably strong. Only the prisoners respect me now. But if I can make kingdoms respect me, if I can make empires respect me, who will stand against me then? I sure wouldn't have ended up in a place like this, that's for sure. For a while, they just continued walking. The long line of people in front of them, as well as behind, gave the whole event an almost religious feeling. And when the tunnel eventually widened out, Ronin was met by a large plateau on the side of the mountain. Inmates lined up everywhere as they all stood still in solemn silence. They seemed to be looking out at something, and Ronin followed their gaze. He saw nearby volcanoes spew out red-hot lava. Further back, he saw other types of volcanoes explode, billowing tons of ash into the atmosphere. The ash blanketed the sky, painting it pitch black, and endless streams of lightning bolts flashed down along its ashy plumes. It was as if this mountain was at the center of a violent storm, being the only calm area in a sea of geological chaos. Ronin lined up along with the rest of the inmates, spotting numerous guards clad in war suits, ready to strike the moment anybody tried to run. As Olsen walked up beside him, the ash in the sky lit up in yellow as a bright streak of light struck down from above. There it is, Ronin thought. A meteor. The heavenly body only became brighter and brighter until finally, in an explosion of illumination, a hole formed in the clouds of ash. Boom. It's at times like this I'm reminded of my son, Olsen said after the sonic boom passed. If you ever get out of here, either leave Tar or join the resistance. We live in an age where the stars are at our fingertips. Cosmic marvels, so grand and majestic they boggle the mind, are out there, waiting. We all have the power to visit them now, but in Tar, we can't. You're different, Ronin. From what I've seen of you this last month, I have a feeling there is more in store for you yet. The CLM supporter then turned to Ronin, his eyes blazing with conviction. Promise me this, kid. If you ever do make it out, remember us. Share our stories so our struggle is not forgotten. Ronin looked to the skies as more and more streaks of light began appearing, and before the sonic booms could drown out his voice, he promised, "All right, I will. I was planning on leaving this kingdom anyways." Then he followed up to himself. When I'm finally free from the corrupt police force, free to make what I want, I will make the greatest spaceship ever built.